Hello, I'm Jeff Smelser, and this will be Course 1, Lesson 2. We're going to start out by reviewing the alphabet that we talked about in Lesson 1. So we start with alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, and remember the alternate form of sigma when it occurs at the end of a word, then tau, upsilon, phi, chi. Remember that xi corresponds to x, while chi corresponds to our hard ch, but a little bit softer than the hard k sound. It's more the k, psi, and omega. Now, today in Lesson 2, we're going to be talking about verbs, and let me get myself out of the way here so that you can see full screen here. And we'll just do it like this. Okay. Well, that didn't get me out of the way, did it? So let's move here. And well, you don't want to look at me any longer than you have to here. Let's do it this way. I'll tell you what. Let's come over here and do that, and that should do the trick. All right, so let's talk about verbs. When we talk about verbs, we're going to talk about tense, voice, and mood, and we will explain what we mean by each of these things in this lesson. Tense, we think of in English as having to do with time of action. We think of the present tense, something that's happening now, the future tense, something that's happening in the future, the past tense, something that has already happened. In Greek, verbs have tense, but more especially than indicating the time of the action, tense indicates kind of action. Time of action has to do with present, future, past. Kind of action is something that we need to give a lot of attention to in Greek. In the first course, we're going to be focusing upon the present tense and the future tense. And let's just make sure we know what we mean by present and future here. This will be fairly simple and obvious for most of us, but let's suppose today is the 27th day of the month. Well, then that would be the present. If we talked about future events, we would be talking about events that transpire in the future, maybe on the 28th day of the month, maybe on the 29th day of the month, maybe on the 30th day of the month. Well, that's what we mean by tense. We're talking about when the action occurs. But that idea, time, as related to the verb, is only absolutely characteristic of the tense in the indicative mood. Now, you don't know what indicative mood means yet, but remember we said verbs have tense, voice, and mood. In a few minutes, we'll talk about the different moods, and one of them is the indicative mood. For now, just accept what I'm telling you, that it is only in a verb that is in the indicative mood that the tense has absolute time signification. Or another way to say that is, it is only in the indicative mood that time indication is inherent in the verb, certainly in an absolute way. But kind of action is something that is distinguished from one tense to another in all moods, not only in the indicative mood. So what do we mean when we say kind of action? Well, let's go back to our calendar here, and again, supposing today is the 27th day of the month, we're going to talk about one kind of action that we can describe as linear. That is action that is ongoing. It's continuous. We might say it is durative or progressive. All of these are words that are used to describe this linear action, action that may have been happening yesterday, may continue tomorrow, but as we, on the 27th day of the month today, consider this action, it is happening, it is ongoing. The present tense in Greek is characterized by this kind of action, linear action, also known as ongoing or continuous or durative or progressive. But we can also have this kind of action at a past time. We can have a past tense that describes action that was happening, action that was ongoing at some point in the past. A second kind of action is punctiliar action. This has to do with action that is thought of as taking place at a point in time, hence the word punctiliar. So it might be action that occurred 2 days ago, and it happened at that moment in time 2 days ago. It's not ongoing today. And then there is action that is the present result of some past action. It occurred, something occurred a couple of days ago, and it resulted in a state, a status that is continuing, that is ongoing even today on the 27th day of the month. And this will be present result of a past action. So these three kinds of action, linear, punctiliar, and present result of a past action, are the kinds of actions that we're thinking about when we say tenses in Greek indicate different kinds of action. There are a couple of words that it'll be helpful if you know. One is Aktionsart, and this is a German word. It means sort of action or kind of action. It's really not a word that has been used so much in recent decades. It used to be used by Greek grammarians to talk about this kind of action characteristic of Greek verbs. Another word is aspect. Aspect has been more popularly used, it seems to me, by Greek grammarians in recent decades. Sometimes these words have been used interchangeably. Some Greek grammarians will make a little bit of a distinction between Aktionsart and aspect. We don't need to concern ourselves with that right now, but just understand that when we talk about the Aktionsart or the aspect of a verb, we're talking about this kind of action, and we're asking the question, is it linear, is it punctiliar, is it present result of a past action? At the website at ntgreek.net, if you go to lesson 2, as you are reading the lesson, when you get to the section on tense, you'll see in the lesson there, this section where we have a little graphic here showing the linear action as a line, the punctiliar action as a point, and the ongoing result of an action that happened at some point, but the result continues. But then down at the bottom of this section, you'll see the words read more about the linear Aktionsart of the present tense. If you click on the words read more, you will come to a page where there's an article that I wrote called Aktionsart and the Present Tense. If you will read that article, and I encourage you to do so, you'll get a good sense of what we mean when we talk about the kind of action associated with the present tense. Well, now let's talk about voice. We said verbs have tense, voice, and mood. We've been talking about tense. What does voice mean? Voice has to do with the relationship between subject and verb. We have the sentence, the bull tramples the ground. The question we want to ask is this: is the subject active or passive with respect to the action? Well, in the sentence, the bull tramples the ground, our verb is tramples. Our subject is bull. And the bull is performing the action of trampling. So here's a bull trampling the ground. The bull is the subject, And this is the active voice because the bull, the subject, is actively performing the action, trampling the ground. Here's another sentence really describing the same event, but here we look at the event differently. We say, the ground is trampled by the bull. Our subject is ground this time. The verb is, the two words, is trampled. Our subject is passive. Here the relationship between the subject and the verb, between the ground and the being trampled, or is trampled, is that the subject is receiving the action. The bull is doing the trampling, but the ground is the subject, and so we say is trampled. That's the passive voice. Looks just the same as the active, is the event described by the active voice if you just see the action taking place. But there's a different subject and there's a different relationship between the subject and the verb. In Greek, we have an active voice, we have a passive voice, and we also have a middle voice. In course 1, we will concern ourselves only with the active voice. We'll get to the passive and middle voices in the second course. Now we need to talk about mood. Some grammarians have used the term mode, where others use the term mood. I will use the term mood. And when we think of different moods, we are thinking about different degrees of contingency. I think this is the best way to think about what we mean by mood. There's a more thorough discussion of this in your lesson in the written form that's online you'll want to read. But for this presentation, let's just think about the action described by a verb, and the person who is describing the action. Is he describing it in such a way that there is contingency as to whether or not it occurs, or is he describing it in such a way as to indicate that it happens, no contingency? The indicative mood is the mood we're going to be studying in the first course, and this is the simplest one. This is the one we used in most of our speaking. And in this mood, there is no contingency. There is zero contingency. I may say, it is raining. I'm not making that contingent upon anything. I'm not saying there's any condition. I'm not saying it might rain. I'm just stating as a fact, it is raining. That is the indicative mood. I might say, it is not raining. If I say it is not raining, there's no contingency there. You know, weatherman gets on television and he forecasts the weather for tomorrow, and truth be told, it may be that there is some contingency about the weather. The weatherman's not always right. Nonetheless, he may speak in the indicative mood and say with confidence, it will rain heavily tomorrow. That's the indicative mood. He is speaking as if it is a fact. It will rain. It's future tense here, but it's still the indicative mood. He is speaking as if this is a fact, no contingency. It will not rain, same thing. Indicative mood, no condition that has to be met as far as the speaker is concerned. He is just stating it as a fact. It will not rain. So that's what's characteristic of the indicative mood, no contingency. But by way of contrast, let's talk about another mood so that you can see when there is contingency, what that looks like. So we're going to talk just briefly here about the subjunctive mood. This is something that you will not be working with in Course 1. You'll get to the subjunctive mood in Course 2. But let's go ahead and introduce the idea now so that you can compare it with the indicative mood. Might you eat some spinach? I'm not stating it as a fact that you will or have or do eat spinach. Might you eat some spinach is really kind of hypothetical. It's asking a question, but we can speak in the subjunctive mood even if we're not asking a question. The response to that previous question might be, were I to eat spinach, I would get sick. There's nothing in the language there that says, as a matter of fact, I'm going to eat spinach, or I am eating spinach. There's nothing in that sentence that states as a matter of fact that I will get sick, but it considers the possibility. Were I to eat spinach, I would get sick. It's kind of hypothetical. Should I get sick, I would not be able to go to work. There's nothing factual stated about whether or not I'm going to work, nor is anything factual stated about whether or not I am sick or getting sick. But it considers the possibility. Should I get sick, I would not be able to go to work. If you were unable to go to work, you would not get paid. Again, there's no factual statement here as to whether or not you are getting paid, or even whether or not you are able to go to work. It is simply a consideration of the hypothesis. What if you were unable to go to work? You would not be paid. As you look at all of this, you see there is significant contingency. We're talking about the hypothetical. In English, when we use the subjunctive mood, you'll notice these words might, would, should. Those are words that are typical of the subjunctive mood in English. The fact is, the subjunctive mood is disappearing from the English language. How often do you speak like this? How often do you hear someone speak like this? Might you eat some spinach? Were I to eat spinach, I would get sick. Should I get sick, I would not be able to go to work. That's not the way people speak today. The subjunctive mood is disappearing from English. But if you can understand what we've said about the subjunctive mood and the fact that there's contingency in the subjunctive mood, then when we think about the indicative mood and say there's no contingency, you'll understand what we're talking about. So when we talk about the verbs that we're going to introduce in today's lesson as being present, active, indicative, we're saying the tense is present. And remember, that indicates not only time of action, but especially kind of action. We're going to say the voice is active. The subject is performing the action that is described by the verb. And the mood is indicative. That is, we are indicating that the action is a matter of fact. It is actual. It's not merely hypothesized. It's not contingent upon something. Whether I'm right or wrong about that is immaterial. The question is, am I representing the action as a fact, or am I speaking of it as hypothetical? Here is the verb that we are going to start with. It's the verb luo. And luo, lambda, upsilon, omega, can mean I loose, and it can also mean I destroy. The stem is lambda, upsilon. And the upsilon is always long in this stem. Lambda, upsilon, the stem for the verb luo. The ending indicates the subject. In English, we sometimes have implicit subjects. If I say go to the corner and turn left, what is the subject in that sentence? Well, if you were taught grammar the way I was taught grammar, we would call the subject you understood. We understand that this is a second person instruction. It is talking to someone saying you go to the corner and turn left, except we don't state the pronoun you. And so in this example, the subject is really implied. It's implicit in the verb, you could say. Well, that's the way Greek verbs are. You may have studied some of the Romantic languages like Latin or French or Spanish. In those languages, too, you're going to find that the verb tells you what the subject is. So here we have three different forms of the verb luo. We have the first person form, luo, with the omega at the end, and that means I loose. First person is I, second person is you, third person is he, she, or it. So luo is the first person form. It means I loose. The second person form, lues, is you loose. And then the third person form, lue, is he, she, or it looses. In English, we sometimes change a verb for singular versus plural. That is, if we are talking, if our subject is singular, we'll use one form of the verb. If our subject is plural, we will use another form of the verb. He goes. Well, the subject is singular, and so we say goes. But what if the subject were plural? What if we said they? Then we would change the verb. We would say they go. So the verb goes is singular, but we use the form go when the subject is plural. This is done very consistently in Greek. That is, the form changes for singular versus plural. The first person, luo, we've already learned, means I loose. But what if we want to say we loose? Then we would say luamen, luamen. The second person verb lues means you loose, but that is singular. If by you we mean a plurality of people, then we would say luete, you plural loose. You don't have to write out plural routinely, although in your homework at first it will be helpful to me to know that you understand the difference if you'll make a little parenthetical notation to indicate whether your English you is singular or plural. Or if you're from Alabama like I am, you can just say y'all loose when it's plural. The third person, lue, means he, she, or it looses. But if we mean they, if it's a plurality of people who are loosing, then the form will be luuse, they loose. These forms differ simply because the endings differ. If you look again at the conjugated verb luo, you see the lambda upsilon is there in all of those forms, but the endings are different. These are the personal endings for the present active indicative verbs. And you need to learn these. You need to memorize these. O, ace, a, amen, ete, use. You can do it to a little tune if you want to. O, ace, a, amen, ete, use. Whatever you do, you must internalize these so it becomes second nature to you. So that if you see use, you don't have to think, what is that? Is that first person? Is it second person? Is it third person? Is it singular? Is it plural? It needs to just be automatic with you. That when you see use at the end of a verb, you know that means they. When you see amen at the end of the verb, you know that means we. That needs to become second nature to you. So drill these endings into your head to the point that you do not have to think about them. Well, let's take these same endings now. They are personal endings for the present active indicative, not merely for the verb luo with the stem lu, but for other verbs as well. So we're going to take the verb blepo, which means I see, and you'll see the stem blep throughout, but again you will see those endings. O, ace, a, amen, ete, use. The future active indicative verb, we're talking about the future tense now. But we still are talking about an active voice and an indicative mood. So now all we're going to do is just talk about a different tense, but still same voice, same mood. As we introduce the future active indicative, there's a concept that is very important that you understand that will be helpful to you throughout your study of New Testament Greek, and that is the concept of principal parts. For each verb, there are 6 principal parts. What this means is there are 6 different basic verb stems that may be very similar to one another for a given verb, or they may be quite different. For the verb luo, the stems in all 6 principal parts are similar. You will always see lambda upsilon, and then you'll see various other features of that will change the verb stem for each principal part. So for some verbs, you may not have that consistent stem that you see in the present active indicative all the way through the principal parts. The future stem is part of the future system. It's built on the second principal part. And you'll look right there and you'll see the verb luso. So the stem looks a little different than the lambda upsilon. The difference is it has a sigma. The present system is built on the first principal part, which is the lambda upsilon. There are actually two tenses that use the first principal part. We don't need to worry about that right now, but I want you to understand it's not as simple as saying each principal part is a tense. No, it's not that simple. There's a first principal part, two tenses are built on that. There's the second principal part, the future tense is built on that stem. So here is the verb luso, which means I shall loose. And you will notice the stem lambda upsilon with the sigma attached to it all the way throughout. There is your second principal part stem. And then we have what will soon be our familiar endings, personal endings, o, es, a, amen, et, use. Let's compare the future tense stem with the present tense stem. Sometimes the future tense stem is completely different than the present tense stem. We will encounter verbs like that along the way. Sometimes the future tense stem, merely has a sigma added to the stem that we see in the present tense. And that's the case with luo. We have lambda upsilon in the present tense, and then we add a sigma to it. We have lambda upsilon sigma in the future tense. Sometimes when that sigma is added to the stem, there's a consonantal blend that results. This happens when the final letter in the first principal part stem is a consonant in one of three categories. If the present stem ends with a consonant, in certain cases the consonant and the sigma will combine to form a consonantal blend. The first circumstance where this happens is when the final consonant in the stem in the first principal part is a labial. That means is a letter that is formed with the lips. Beta, P, phi. These are all labials. When you say beta, but, feel your lips come together. When you say P, feel your lips come together. Phi. When we say phi, our lips don't quite come all the way together, but they come very close together. And so these are all labials, sounds formed with the lips. When we have a word, a stem, where the last letter in the stem is one of these labials, it combines with the sigma when forming the future tense to form the consonantal blend psi. When we say the letter psi, it's a PS sound combined. So it kind of makes sense. If you take the letter P and the letter sigma and you put them together, you get psi. The same thing holds for beta or phi. When those are combined with sigma, you get psi. So for example, let's take the verb blepo, that means I see. The future of blepo is blepso. How do we get that? Here is our verb blepo. Let's remove the personal ending so that we just have the stem, the present tense stem of the first principal part, blep. Now, let's take the sigma that we need to form the future tense stem. The sigma comes down and it combines with the P to form psi. And so we now have the future tense stem, bleps. And we can now add our personal ending back to it, the omega, and we have blepso, and that means I shall see. Another category of consonants that will form a consonantal blend are the palatals. They are formed with the palate, the roof of your mouth. If you think about the letters gamma, kappa, and chi, each of those letters is formed by what we do with the back of our tongue and the roof of the mouth. When we say gamma, we take the top of the back of our tongue and press it up against the roof of the mouth, the palate. Kappa, we do the same thing as in gamma, except when we say kappa, we pop it a little harder. We make it a crisper sound. You can feel if when you say ka, kappa, ka, you can feel your tongue back there hitting the roof of your mouth. When we say ki, we're hitting the roof of our mouth with the tongue in about the same way or about the same place, but we are not holding it there firmly and we're letting air get through, and so it gives a little vibration, ki, and we get that guttural sound. Gamma, kappa, and ki are palatals. When a stem ends in a palatal, and then we're going to form the future tense by means of adding a sigma, the palatal consonant combines with the sigma to form xi. And so we take the verb ago, alpha, gamma, omega, which means I lead, and the future of that is ogzo. So how do we get ogzo? Well, we take the stem, alpha, gamma, which you see in the yellow box there, og, and then we bring the sigma down that we're going to combine with that stem to form the future tense. The gamma and the sigma combine to form xi, and we now have ogs. And we can detach the omega for the first personal ending, and for the first person singular personal ending. And we can say ogzo, and that means I shall lead. The third category of letters that will combine with sigma to form a consonantal blend are the dentals and also zeta. Dentals are letters that are formed with the teeth. When we say da, as in delta, we put the tip of our tongue right behind our upper teeth. Now in my case, I actually hit the roof of my mouth right behind my teeth rather than hitting my teeth themselves to say da, da. But you do that. You say delta, da. And you feel the tip of your tongue right behind your upper teeth there. Similarly, theta, we use the teeth. The tongue comes between the upper and lower teeth, and we say theta. Or tau. With tau, the tongue is placed just about the same place as with delta, da, except we pop it a little bit harder. It's a little crisper sound. Zeta, you may remember, can make the sound that Z makes, but when it is internal, that is, when it's not the first letter in a word, then it's DZ, idzo. And when you do that, when you don't just say Z, but you say idzo, it's DZ, and you can feel your tongue go up there and hit that place just behind your teeth, just behind your upper teeth. And so when zeta occurs at the end of a stem, well, it's going to be internal, and so it will make that DZ sound. And so it's going to be treated as a dental. Well, when one of these letters, zeta or one of the dentals, combines with sigma, what happens is the dental just goes away, and we're just left just with the sigma. So we have the verb sozo, which means I save. And the future of sozo is so-so. How did that happen? Well, here's our verb, sozo, in the yellow box. We'll take away the personal ending and bring in the, well, I guess we didn't take away the personal ending. Let's do that again. So here's our verb, sozo, in the yellow box. And I guess we've come far enough along here, we don't have to take away the omega. We know we're going to take it away and put it back. So we'll just bring the sigma right in. The zeta goes away, and the sigma replaces it. In the particular case of sozo, there's another difference between the present tense and the future tense, and that is that the present tense is usually written with an omega iota subscript, whereas the future tense is written without the iota subscript. there is some inconsistency in ancient Greek here and some uncertainty as to whether or not the future should have the iota subscript. We're going to just write it without the iota subscript for the future. But this will mean I shall save. Let's take a look at a little feature of Greek called the movable nu. So here's our verb blepo, and it means I see. And we have the first person, which means I see, blepo. Second person singular, which means you, singular see, blepes. Third person singular, blepe, he, she, or it sees. And then we have the plural forms, blepomen, we see, blepete, you, plural, see, or y'all see. And then blepuse, third person plural. But there's an alternate way to write the third person plural form. We can add at the end the letter nu. Doesn't change the meaning one bit. It's just an alternate way to write the third person plural form. And this is true not only for blepo, but generally speaking for these verbs when we get to the third person plural in the present active indicative. There's no good rule that explains when the nu occurs and when it doesn't. You might think that sometimes it seems like the nu is there when the following word begins with a vowel, and it's not there when the following word begins with a consonant, but that is not at all consistent. It's really just a matter of taste and style, and so you're going to recognize that that third person plural form has the ending use, and sometimes it has the ending usin with the nu. And it's just kind of haphazard when it may occur and when it may not occur. Here's our verb luo again, in the future, luso. And so we have our third person plural form down in the lower right, lususe. And again, we can have the movable nu there. It may be present, it may not. It doesn't change the meaning of the word one bit. So to review what we've done in this lesson, tense indicates not only time of action, but more especially kind of action. Voice pertains to the relationship between the subject and the verb, whether the subject is performing the action described by the verb or is receiving the action described by the verb. We're going to be talking about the present and future tenses, and we're going to be talking about the active voice. Mood can be thought of as the degree of contingency, and we're going to concern ourselves with the indicative mood here in course 1, and there is zero contingency in the indicative mood. We're talking about things matter-of-factly. In the present active indicative, the kind of action is linear. The relationship of subject to verb is active. That is, the subject is performing the action rather than being acted upon. And the degree of contingency is zero. That is, reality rather than hypothetical activity is in view. The present active indicative is conjugated by adding personal endings to the stem. For the most of the verbs we will learn in this course, the future active indicative is formed by adding a sigma to the present stem prior to adding the personal endings to the stem. Sometimes this sigma is combined with the previous letter to form a new letter, a consonantal blend. Now I just want to remind you here that I told you when I introduced the concept of principal parts to you that sometimes the future stem is just completely different than the present stem. The future stem is going to come from the second principal part. Present stem is going to come from the first principal part. Sometimes those principal parts are very different. But for the verbs, for most of the verbs that we're going to be studying in this first course, we won't be running into that situation very often. For most of the verbs we're going to be learning in this first course, there's little difference between the first principal part and second principal part. The primary difference will simply be the addition of the sigma in the second principal part, which is used for the future tense. In both the present and future active indicative, the third person plural form may have a new added to the end of the word, a movable new. I want to back up. I just want to state here that while I say that most of the verbs you're going to be learning merely have that sigma added to form the future tense, do remember that when that sigma is added, it may result in a consonantal blend in the cases that we've already discussed. So you will be seeing a number of verbs where the future has that consonantal blend. All right, well, that's a review of what we've done here in Lesson 2 of Course 1. Remember that this material is also online. I encourage you to read the material online so that you'll get this material both ways. Have a good day.